This is episode 324 of That Shakespeare Life. Just like the work of William Shakespeare, That Shakespeare Life is made possible by our patrons. Join us today at patreon.com/thatshakespearelife and stay tuned after the episode for even more details. There's a small content warning for today's show. In today's episode, we're going to play authentic recreations of early modern ballads as they would have been heard for Shakespeare's lifetime. There are 3 samples for this episode, 2 of which are wonderful for the general listening audience. One, however, was based on Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus, and if you know anything about that play, it's very violent. This last ballad sample does contain very graphic, violent content described in words. If you have a sensitivity to violence, or if you're listening with a younger audience, we recommend that you preview this episode before continuing.
Hi, I'm Rob Eastaway, the author of Much Ado About Numbers. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
You know, you might be in the alehouse when somebody says to somebody, would you like some music, and somebody pays for it. You can be in the marketplace and hear somebody singing the songs without paying a penny. So pretty much anyone can buy them, and they are accessible in terms of cost, and they're accessible because even if you can't read, I bet you know somebody who can. So it means they're pretty accessible to anyone.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
When Shakespeare mentions ballads in his plays, he uses adjectives like odious and woeful, mentioning both the ballad makers in Coriolanus and the people who sell them, known as ballad mongers in Henry IV, Part 1. Shakespeare has over 20 references to ballads throughout his works, all of which tell us that these songs were written in ink, published by printers, and performed in songs that not only rhymed, but that could be just as merry as it was painful, particularly if the ballad was sung out of tune, as Cleopatra complains in Antony and Cleopatra. Here today to share with us some of the exact ballads that were popular for Shakespeare's lifetime, as well as the history of how they were created and performed, is our guests and masterminds behind the 100 Ballads Project that seeks to recreate and preserve ballads from the 17th century. We are delighted to welcome Angela McShane, Christopher Marsh, and Andy Watts. Andy Watts is a multi-instrumentalist specializing in historically informed performance on woodwind instruments. He began his career with the theater company The Medieval Players and has performed with such noted groups as the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment and the Academy of Ancient Music. Today, Andy plays with the Carnival Band, a band he formed in 1984. The Carnival Band performs a mixture of early, traditional, and world music, and with them, Andy has toured as far afield as Sudan, the Gulf States, and Japan. The Carnival Band's songful talents are responsible for the music you'll hear at 100ballads.org. Angela McShane is an honorary reader in history at the University of Warwick, who has published widely on political balladry, including numerous book chapters and journal articles. Angela is the author of a reference work titled Political Broadside Ballads in 17th Century England, a Critical Biography. As an expert on political song and ballad publishing, Angela worked as a co-investigative historian on the 100 Ballads Project, working to establish which known songs were the most popular for the 16th and 17th century and gathering them into this online database. Christopher Marsh established the project 100ballads.org. Having seen gaps in the previous research into the history of broadside ballads, Christopher wanted to study which of the surviving ballads were actually successful for this time period. He also wanted to challenge the notion that bawdy humor was the sole subject for ballads of the 16th and 17th century. Christopher reached out to Angela and Andy, among several other experts in this field, to pull together the project's beginnings. Christopher is a professor of cultural history at Queen's University, Belfast. His most relevant book in relation to the 100 Ballads Project is Music and Society in Early Modern England. This is an overview of how music making in the 16th and 17th centuries was done, and it includes chapters on musicians, dancing, bell ringing, psalm singing, and of course, ballads. You can find out more about all of our guests this week, along with links to their publications related to ballads and more information on their work more generally, including the 100 Ballad Project, all packed into the show notes for today's episode. Hello, Angela, Chris, and Andy. It's a delight to have you join us today and to tell us more about the 100 Ballads Project. Welcome to That Shakespeare Life.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Yep, thanks for having us.
Hello, thanks for having us.
What features define a ballad, and how are ballads different from folk songs? And tell us whether or not they are the same kind of ballad that we see later from Victorian England.
Okay, well, a ballad was a song printed on one side of a sheet of paper for commercial sale. And you see them as a sort of staple of English culture from the 16th century right through into the 19th century. So yes, there's a kind of continuity there into the 19th century, but 19th century ballads kind of look quite different. The format has changed. And through Shakespeare's life, the standard form of this sort of early modern ballad was evolving. So by the time he died, he'd be talking about a text with multiple verses, some pictures along the top, no musical notation, but a tune named for singing the song. Folk song, I mean, defining folk song is a bit of a minefield, but essentially a folk song is I think, a song that was passed down or passed around orally and orally rather than in print. Folk song is a much later term. We don't really see that mentioned until the 19th century, but there's lots of overlap between early modern ballads and later folk songs. So several of the songs that are on our website are the earliest known versions of songs that later became well-known folk songs that were collected in the late 19th and early 20th century in Britain and in America. Just one example, our number 37, which is a ballad about a character called Little Mousegrove, was found in a much reduced form centuries later in early 20th century America, where Mousegrove had become Little Matty Grove. So there's lots of kind of continuity and kind of cross-fertilization between printed commercial broadside ballads and later folk songs.
The next question comes from a listener of That Shakespeare Life who wants to know about ballads versus ditties. In Henry IV Part 1, as well as Much Ado About Nothing, there are characters that refer to a song and they call it a ditty, dittie. And this listener wants to know, what is the difference between a ballad and a ditty?
Great question. So I had a thought about this, and I'm going to come up with a theory. I'm not sure that this is the truth, if you see what I mean. I would say probably, and certainly in Shakespeare's time, if we say ballad, we really mean that product that Chris was just talking about. So something that's been published, it's quite long, it's available to everyone. And also, importantly, during Shakespeare's lifetime, particularly, the ballad trade was incredibly disreputable. So it's also something that's rather low, something you don't want to admit, very lewd, possibly blasphemous. So, it's not got a great reputation. Now, a ditty, I think, really just indicates songs that are being sung and loved by people. And it's not necessarily very long. It's not necessarily been published. And it's like the songs sung by Ophelia, if you like. There's lots of little tunes. People are singing them. They may be sung at court. They may be sung in the fields. Some of them may get printed. Some of them may be what Chris has just described as folk music, songs that people know and they get passed on. But to me, I think that's what I think possibly is meant by a ditty.
When we are looking at ballads, they're being printed in this way. Who are the most popular writers of ballads for Shakespeare's lifetime? Or were they even admitting to being the writers, since you didn't necessarily want to be associated with this form of music?
Good point. Well, now thinking through this, so I've only got up until 1616. So I thought, well, the two best known in this period were William Elderton and Thomas Deloney. These are, real celebrities. People know them. They're famous. Elderton is famous for being a drinker. Actually, Deloney's a bit of a drinker too. But he's kind of famous for nearly starting riots in London with his songs. And Elderton is actually really considered to be, one of the greatest balladeers. One person calls him the father of the balladeer. And he was an actor, in fact. He was an actor. He was a producer of plays. He taught acting to the boys at Eton. And one of his songs allegedly, does appear in a Shakespeare play, in Much Ado, where Bendick sings God of Love, and that is an Elderton tune. Deloney, who probably is more, I think, a kind of father of the ballad in that. So many of his songs were printed on single sheets, and he was a real user of the trade in that way. As far as I can tell, he doesn't appear in any plays, but he was seen as a really important songwriter. And his songs were published right through the whole century, really.
Ballad writers sound a whole lot like gangster rap and what that had been, at least here in the US, where the writers and the music itself are based upon a lot of topics and content that are considered unsavory. I know in the 90s, they first started putting, explicit lyrics on the front of CD cases. And I'm dating myself here because nobody listens to CDs now. But that concept of it being popular and profitable and an established part of industry, but also something that is controversial or has a tinge to it of not necessarily the upper class of society. That parallel, I think, sounds similar.
Yes. I mean, it's certainly the case that, very much during Shakespeare's time and up to 1616, the trade had become so infamous that there was a company that kind of organized the whole of the printing trade, decided that only 5 printers could have the right to print them at all. And this was in a desperate attempt to get the whole thing under control. Now, Shakespeare dies in 1616. That particular piece of legislation actually has sort of collapsed by about 1620. But in many ways, it did get the trade under control. It became much more specialized and homogenized. So interestingly, it makes quite a difference ultimately to the reputation of the industry.
In his play, Antony and Cleopatra, Cleopatra refers to a ballad being recognizably out of tune. Were ballads from Shakespeare's lifetime all sung to a standard set of tunes? And if so, what was the music that went along with the ballads that were being printed?
Well, the tunes weren't notated on the sheet, so you don't get musical notation, but they were named at the top, so there'd often be an instruction on a ballad to the tune of Flying Fame or to the tune of Fortune. So the idea was that people knew the tunes and then could set the new texts to the existing tunes. So in The Winter's Tale, when Autolycus is selling ballads to Dorcas and Mopsa, they say at one point they know the tune already. So he's selling a sheet, they know the tune, so they're confident they can fit the words that he's going to sell them to the tune that they already know. Other ballads were set to new tunes, in which case the customers learned the tunes from the ballad singer. It's often difficult to determine exactly where the tunes originated. Some were clearly newly composed by ballad makers. Others come from the theatre or from dance tunes. Some come from the continental music. And in the tunes as a whole, there's a great variety. Some are very simple and are used for lots and lots of different songs. Others are more complex, and these tend to become more strongly associated with particular songs. And a very nice example of a tune is the one that's on a ballad called The Spanish Lady's Love, which is our number 22 on the website. And this tells the story of a Spanish aristocratic woman who falls head over heels in love with an English sea captain who's keeping her prisoner. So it originated in the wars between England and Spain in the later 16th century, of course, very familiar to Shakespeare. And this one has a very lovely, bright melody that was kind of only really used for that tune. It wasn't used for that song. It wasn't used for other ones.
Will you hear a Spanish lady, how she would an Englishman? Garments gay as rich as may be, decked with jewels had she on, of a fair and comely.
Are there any ballads that show up in Shakespeare's plays? Or you said that some of the tunes actually originated from theater. So I guess I'd also ask if it was ever going the other way, where some tunes from Shakespeare's theater inspired some ballads, kind of like how when we see a pop song show up in a movie today, where was the crossover there?
That's a very nice question. There are lots of references to hit songs in plays of the period, not only in Shakespeare's. And yes, there's two-way traffic between ballad songs and theatre songs. A couple of examples from Shakespeare. I mean, in Twelfth Night, Sir Toby Belch, in a mood of drunken revelry, sings the line, "There dwelt a man in Babylon, lady, lady," while being told off for his rowdiness. And that line is only slightly misremembered, and it comes from ballad number 24 on the website, which is all about the constancy of Susanna, the biblical heroine who rejected the advances of the lecherous elders of Babylon. So it's disrespectful of Sir Toby to be singing the song about such a godly biblical woman during a drinking session. And then the other one that springs to mind from Shakespeare is in The Merry Wives of Windsor, when Mistress Ford says that Falstaff's disposition and his words, and this quotation, do no more adhere than the 100 psalms to the tune of Greensleeves. Now, Greensleeves was a hit romantic song of 1580. So the point there is that the melody doesn't go with the sober matter of the biblical psalms, and also that Falstaff is misrepresenting himself. And the original song there is not on our website, but the tunes on several of the other songs, number 50, for example, uses the tune of Greensleeves on a mock lullaby. So you get all these kind of references to particular songs that run right through play texts of the period. And I think the point is that only works if a significant proportion of your audience are recognizing and picking up the references. So that's, I think, why they're there, because you hear the reference and then you can place it. You have your own kind of association. So yes, very intertwined. Ballads and plays are very much intertwined.
Before we met today, Chris let me know that there was at least one ballad that was directly inspired by Shakespeare's play Titus Andronicus. Chris, what can you tell us about this ballad's relationship to theatre and to Shakespeare in particular?
Yes, well, there's lots of cross-fertilization between plays and ballads. Sometimes a play comes first and then there's a spin-off ballad. Sometimes a ballad comes first and then there's a play that picks up the subject of the ballad. Shakespeare's play Titus Andronicus definitely came first, I think. Shakespeare probably wrote it in 1593, first performed soon thereafter. And early in 1594, the publisher John Danter registered both the play and the ballad with the Stationers' Company. The ballad is number 15 on the website. I'm pretty certain that the ballad was a spin-off from the play. Perhaps it was sold to theatre crowds as they arrived or as they left as a sort of souvenir. The ballad narrative tracks the play very, very closely indeed, though the action has to be condensed in order to fit it into the ballad, sometimes to the point where it becomes almost cryptic and you wonder, could you really understand what the ballad narrative if you didn't kind of know the play already? And because it's concentrated, and because even in a play length, it's Shakespeare's bloodiest play. In the ballad, there are over 11 violent deaths. There's the rape and the mutilation of Lavinia. There's suicide. I think I counted 32 out of the 34 people who are mentioned in the ballad are dead by the end. So it also reveals the kind of dark tastes that characterize the early modern ballad audience. And the ballad was set to the somber but hugely popular tune of Fortune, My Foe. Andy's been involved in kind of performing this about 10 times for the website, so he knows it very well. And to that tune, the ballad climaxes with Titus's creative revenge in feeding the evil empress a pie that's been made with the crushed bones of her recently butchered sons.
This song is quite gory and bloody, and it really does not hold back in the presentation of the macabre. In listening to this song, my first impression was to be shocked at the content, but comparing ballads and their performance to television as an analog for popular entertainment for us today, it really isn't much different than having violent and gory television shows as not only options for entertainment, but options that are quite popular right alongside other genres like romance or comedy that might not contain as much gore. It seems like ballads also operate as different genres for popular entertainment, such that different kinds of ballads would have different kinds of content for a varied audience.
Yes, no, absolutely. And the ballad seems to have stayed popular longer than the play, which is kind of interesting. So if you'd been around in the second half of the 17th century and someone mentioned Titus Andronicus, you're probably going to think about the ballad rather than about the play. The play seems to have sort of faded more quickly than the ballad.
Oh, poor Shakespeare. But we do say it was his first. So that's okay. So we've talked about them being published as text form and being made widely available that way, as well as how there's overlap between the songs showing up in plays of the period. But were the songs ever performed as a whole in something like a concert or presented, in some kind of this is the way it goes presentation to the public?
Finding definite records of this is possible, and it has been done. But quite a lot of people turn to Autolycus, in fact, to give an example of how that worked in the market. And in many ways, Autolycus has emerged from the ballad trade into Shakespeare's consciousness, also Johnson and Beaumont Fletcher, actually, because the ballad singer who sings and sells ballads has become a new thing. And I think people don't realise that they literally appear all at the same time, in the 1610s, because they're being noticed. And that's because the ballad trade are starting to employ these people to sell them. So in many ways, Autolycus really, and Nightingale and others, are really doing what you can see. So these people do have a kind of informal stage in a marketplace or a fair and so on. But we also know that there are people who stand in the streets and sing, and they may sing the whole song. It depends how good a singer they are, because, the thing is, there's no separation between the person who's singing and the crowd. If they're rubbish, they'll soon find out. So that definitely happens. But indoors, you get real performances. So moving up the kind of social level, at the lowest level, you've got ale houses where musicians will come, perhaps just a fiddler and his boy who'll sing some songs quite cheaply. People can buy them, sort of buy, as it were, them to sing a song.
Sort of a busk type singer with the guitar out on the street.
Exactly, yeah. Except inside. This is inside. So they are being these people they'll come along and they'll say, will you have some music? And then you can give them a bit of money and they'll sing a song for you. You can even ask them what song you want to hear. This is true in taverns where you might get actually several musicians and singers who will perform for people, again, gentlemen who've wanted it. And in inns where you can also get actually a whole concerts, if you like. Concert is a bit of an 18th century word, but you certainly can get a little repertoire happening with people who have come in. And then you also get them sung by professionals at court. They're singing ballads at civic feasts. So they really are sung all over the place, as well as, of course, in fields and workshops and at home. So there's a lot of performing of these songs going on.
So truthfully, the process of becoming a successful music artist is not all that different from today. You start out singing in bars and on the circuit and at fairs and anywhere you can get a gig, and then move on up to performing at places like court, or in the modern sense, at a concert. That's
right. Although I guess if you're going to play at court, the chances are that you've come up through a slightly more enhanced route. Having said that, Thomas Campion, for example, Thomas Campion is, he learns how to do medicine and other things. Certainly he's been to grammar school and things like that, but he's not rich, he's not posh, but he ends up at court. So it's true that you could simply just be really good. You're really good, you could make it.
This next question was submitted by a patron of our show, Michael Nelson. Thank you for submitting this question. He writes, I read that the woodcuts used on the cover of the sheet music were direct predecessors of today's cartoons. I would enjoy hearing your guests comment on that and address whether there were any regular woodcut characters that were readily recognizable to the general public, or that would indicate the kind of music one might be purchasing.
Yeah, well, thank you to Michael for a great question, right up my street. Pictures on ballads became standard feature during Shakespeare's life, and the ballad woodcuts have been frequently dismissed by modern scholars because of the way they're often just recycled. So they're not particular to a song. They're just kind of old images that are then kind of reused. And that's been taken as a sign that there was no real care going into how they were chosen and placed. But there is clear evidence that the ballad makers often tried to assemble these recycled pictures in a way that kind of roughly tracked each story. There's a lovely example on the website from ballad number 115, which is called The Crafty Miss. And this tells the story of a woman who allows herself to be seduced by a tax collector so that she can steal all of his money, all the money he's collected, and also steal his horse. There are 3 pictures, and they're recycled pictures, so they're not specially created. Actually, 4 pictures. On the left-hand side, there's a little picture of a man and a woman appearing to sort of move towards one another. And then on the right, there's a picture of a woman riding a horse, and another one of a man with his arms raised in shock. And these 4 recycled images just tell the story very, very nicely. And Michael mentioned were there sort of regular woodcuts that people would have recognized. On that particular ballad, the man and the woman crop up again and again on dozens and dozens of different ballads. We've characterized the man as the howdy-do man because he kind of has his hand held out in greeting, and the woman we're calling the welcoming woman. These were found on dozens and dozens of ballads of the period. So people would have recognized these figures. They would have known them from previous stories. And seeing these two coming together, which is a very kind of frequent pairing, they would have recognized that this was going to be a song about a sexual or a romantic encounter. And then I should just mention that sometimes new images were specially created for ballads, and again there you get a combination of a sort of composite picture where all the action from the woodcut is kind of placed in a single picture, but then you do also get these sort of comic strip thinking developing as well. Like there's one number 62 about the adventures of a London apprentice. He ends up at the court of the Sultan in Turkey. He beats everyone in a jousting tournament. He kills the Sultan's son in a fight. And then when he's fed to the lions, he puts his hands down the throats of both the lions who are supposed to eat him and pulls their hearts out. So it's a very kind of realistic story, as you can tell. But in the pictures, these 3 scenes there's a little box, and these 3 scenes are clearly represented, tracking the narrative in a way that is a kind of early version of the comic strip, the sequencing of separate pictures, I think.
I just want to say as well that one of my favourites in terms of these narrative images, and that was definitely around in Shakespeare's lifetime, was a song I like to call Queen Eleanor's Comeuppance. And it's number 73, and it tells the story of how evil Queen Eleanor has got rid of Jane Shore, has threatened to cut the breasts of every woman in the country. And the whole story of the ballad is, again, in one of these narrative images. So it's really good. Do go and look at it. But the other thing to notice is that, so Shakespeare dies in 1616. Well, actually, a large number of the woodcuts that appear on Broadside ballads at the time had been made new. So, in fact, there's a period during his lifetime when all these new images are appearing, and they actually show the latest fashions. They show particular characters. So it's quite an exciting time, I guess, because you're actually getting a kind of artwork that is really new. Now, these become so beloved, as Chris has said, that they are continually not only reused, but remade. I mean, they're so beloved that they get remade over time. But it's just worth noting.
So what were the instruments used for performing ballads? Were there any particular instruments that was like, this is the way a ballad's going to be played?
The most important thing to realize about the ballads is that they're vocal music. So the most common instrument used in every ballad is the human voice. And on the 100 Ballads website, we have a number of ballads that we've decided to perform just in that way, with a single singer. And then sometimes with 1 or 2 joining in with a chorus or adding some harmonies. So the voice is primary. If you did want to add some instrumental accompaniment, there was no set formula. There was nothing specified on the ballad sheets. And perhaps the most important thing would be to have something that was easily portable. So something that might come to hand. You might just pick up a pot, a saucepan, and hit it with a wooden spoon and provide some percussion accompaniment. You might have a Jew's harp, a little mouth harp that you would carry in your pouch, and you could pull that out. A violin, a fiddle, of course, is quite portable, and that's referred to. In terms of instruments that provide harmony, the cittern is a really common and useful instrument of the time. It had a particular vogue around Shakespeare's time, both in art music and in popular music. And a cittern is wire-strung, quite a small body. If you imagine something like a flat-back mandolin, it doesn't have much of a bass sound, but it can produce a really silvery set of chords or quite an elaborate melodic line. So it's very flexible. Whatever you're using, the idea of the instrument would be just to enhance the words, the mood of the song, and should never dominate or distract from the story that's being told in the words. No doubt that ballads could be accompanied by more classy instruments like the lute. Keyboard instruments, perhaps not so much, but perhaps at home, if there was a set of virginals in a wealthy household, they might have been used to play a ballad. But there's certainly no particular instrument specified on any of the ballad sheets, although sometimes they're mentioned. A fiddle gets mentioned, a theorbo, which is a type of lute, gets mentioned later in the century, and so on.
Let's listen to a sample of a ballad that uses instruments in the performance. This clip is called Dead Man's Song. The earliest surviving edition of this ballad is dated 1624, and you will hear instruments used throughout this song.
So sick, dear friends, long time I was, and weakly laid in bed, and for 5 hours in all men's sight at length I lay as dead. The bell rung out, my friends came in, and I cold was found. Then was my carcass brought from bed and cast upon the ground.
Now, at the website 100ballads.org, it lists that Broadside ballads were, quote, single sheet songs that sold for a penny apiece. What was the purpose of having these songs printed in this particular format? And who was the primary consumer that were buying these ballads?
Well, the ballad is brilliantly designed to be pinned up, pasted onto a wall. So in that regard, it couldn't be better designed, really. And the other thing about it is that because it is printed on a single sheet, it's really good for apprentices to train on, because the composition, and by that I mean the typesetting of that sheet, doesn't have all the complications of a book where some of it has to be upside down and all that kind of thing. So it can be a good training exercise. And the third thing about it is that it makes it very useful when a printing press is quiet. So while people are perhaps typesetting more complicated works, the printer continues to be used because you can put some ballads through. So there's lots of reasons why it's a jolly good design. Now, the cost of it at a penny makes it pretty accessible. And so that's also quite important. And the thing to remember is that it stays at a penny for over 100 years. So you get a classic case of shrinkflation, where eventually they start halving the size of a ballad. They also shorten it a bit to make it possible to produce them, for still the same cost to everybody. I mean, in the earlier period in the 1590s, which is in fact a period of considerable hardship and also hunger in some parts of England, worth bearing in mind what you can buy for a penny. So you can buy a quart of beer or ale for a penny. You can buy a loaf of bread for a penny. So you're making quite a decision. You can also buy a tour of the Tower of London for a penny, so if you're wanting to throw your money away, you might prefer that. But so it's worth bearing in mind that it makes it incredibly accessible. So who bought them? Well, anyone that can afford a penny will buy them if they like popular songs, if they like the pictures, if they like what they're hearing. But of course, you can get it for free. You might be in the alehouse when somebody says to somebody, would you like some music, and somebody pays for it. You can be in the marketplace and hear somebody singing the songs without paying a penny. So pretty much anyone can buy them, and they are accessible in terms of cost And they're accessible because even if you can't read, I bet you know somebody who can. So it means they're pretty accessible to anyone.
So what's the difference between an author of a ballad and the person who publishes them? Who is it that's given credit for the song? You've mentioned that there were some, I really like this particular ballad, so I'm going to pay to buy it. Was there any credit given to the person that created it, or was the song kind of standalone that way?
So ballads come in several types. One is that you can get a ballad that has got a name on it, the name of an author. From my research, it looks like if it's got a name on it, that it's probably been written by that person. And it's possible that that person, especially if they're named in the Stationers' Register, not only gets paid a one-off fee for writing the song, giving the copy to a publisher, but also gets to share in some of the profits. So I think that's quite likely. Now, most ballads, as we know, don't have anybody's name on them. And that's probably because they're written by multiple hands. They've been edited, they've been honed to be just the thing for a ballad sheet. And those are unquestionably owned by the publisher. So the publisher could be a printer or could be a bookseller. And they can signal that they have ownership of that title, only if it's a good one. I mean, if it never sells, they don't generally bother to register it. But if it does sell, they'll put their name into the register and they'll secure their rights to that title. And during Shakespeare's time, then actually quite a lot of those people, as I mentioned before, were printers. So printers owned a lot of those rights. But after about 1624, it's mostly booksellers, and they get quite rich, and they are very much in charge of what gets published and so on. So that's a difference.
Well, I know we would love to learn more about this topic and about the history of this kind of music. What are some of your favorite books or resources you can recommend we use to learn more?
I've thought of two things. One is a book by Bruce Smith called The Acoustic World of Early Modern England, which is all about the sort of sounds of Elizabethan England particularly, but there's lots on the kind of sound of the theatre and the acoustics of the theatre, music as well in there. And then the other one I was going to mention is the Arden Critical Companion to Shakespeare and Music by David Lindley is actually a very kind of short and highly informative look at all the different ways in which Shakespeare used music. So I think that might be an interesting read for some of your listeners.
So I had a thought about this, and I thought, well, obviously the first thing is the website, which is kind of amazing. It's got all kinds of contextual stuff. I mean, I just can't tell you how tremendous it is for that. If people are not wanting to go and really get deep into academic work, but if you are interested in going a little bit further like that, two books I've really enjoyed. Well, three actually. One is Chris's book, which is really important if you want to know about music making in early modern England. So you should absolutely look at that. I particularly loved a book called The Elizabethan Top 10, which is a collection of essays by Emma Smith or edited by Emma Smith and Andy Kesson, which is really quite a fabulous collection. So interesting, so many interesting takes in there. And something I've looked at recently, although it's not a particularly recent book, which is by Harriet Phillips, called Nostalgia and Print in Performance, because she really does do some sort of fascinating thinking about the stage, and particularly Shakespearean stage, and how it's kind of reflective of a culture of ballad. So it brings back that idea that Chris was talking about, this very much overlapping spaces in terms of entertainment.
I'm going to recommend a classic, and it's really a standard text. And it's for anybody who wants to play some of these tunes for themselves. The book they need, and there's only one, I think. It's by Claude M. Simpson, and it's called The British Broadside Ballad and Its Music. And there's practically every ballad tune that we know about in there, even though it was produced as long ago as 1966. It's an absolutely wonderful book. If you love ballads, you'll love this book.
These are all excellent resources. We will place links to all of them in today's show notes so you can go and find them quickly, including a link to the 100 Ballads website so you can explore the ballads themselves, how they sounded. And we hope that you will explore the in-depth history surrounding their publication and place in pop culture for Shakespeare's lifetime. Stay tuned for the URL for where to find those. Angela, Chris, and Andy, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible, so your choice would be in addition to those.
Okay, well, I'm going to be pathetic because I'm in so much trouble trying to get a book finished. I'm going to take that. I'm going to take that with me.
Very industrious of you, Angela. Well, that's fine. You can take. Can you tell us what it is, or you have to keep it under wraps?
It's about the ballad trade and its politics, and there'll be a bestseller when it comes out.
Absolutely.
Course.
Well, I'll be first in line. What about you, Chris? What would you take with you to your deserted island?
I'm going to jump right out of the early modern period. I would take J.D. Salinger, The Catcher in the Rye. I've got incredibly strong memories of reading that book as a sort of turbulent, troubled teenager around about 1980. I think it's a kind of unique voice in modern literature. I often turn to it. That was quite short, actually. Maybe I should have thought of something longer, but I would take The Catcher in the Rye.
Going with a classic. I like it. Andy, what about you?
I would take a collection of writings by Miles Nagopoline, and that was the pen name of Brian O'Nolan, also known as Flann O'Brien, so you can guess it's an Irish writer. And there's a collection from the writings in his columns in the Irish Times and other Irish magazines. They're wonderfully witty, clever, learned, and he's a wonderful companion to have on a desert island. So that's called The Best of Miles by Miles Nagopoline.
I think you've all made unique and profitable choices for your desert island selections. Those will be nice.
I should say, though, of course, that I've got a definite out because the publisher's going to come and get me because he's dead to me. So...
They're going to fly in and find you because...
Yeah, or at least the manuscript. They'll probably leave me behind.
Well, what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
The next book after this one.
You already have that lined up?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I would have thought you'd have to at least take a breather after digging out from under this first one.
Oh, yeah.
Chris, what are you working on now that you're excited about?
I'm going to spend chunks of next year writing a book all about these ballads, about the best-selling ballads. I've got some research leave next year and preparing the website. I've never done a website before, but it's all quite... You do things in bits. You do a little bit of that and a little bit of that. It's all quite disjointed. So to have the opportunity to kind of sit down and kind of really think about the whole thing, that's my next adventure in balladry next year.
And Andy, I know you have something exciting coming up. What's next for you?
With my band, the Carnival Band, who have featured on the website, we are preparing a tour with the singer Maddie Pryor, who some of your listeners and viewers may know. She was the lead, or is still the lead singer with Steel Eye Span, folk rock group. But we've toured with her on and off for the last 40 years. So we've got a very special anniversary to celebrate with her in December. And then after that, we hope that we will have some sort of launch concert for the whole Ballads Project, the 100 Ballads website, but that's a little bit further off at the moment.
Well, we will look forward to seeing all of your publications and performances coming up, and I really appreciate all of you being here to take us through the history of ballads and pop culture music and how that overlaps with Shakespeare and Shakespeare's plays. This has been a really fun conversation, and I appreciate you being here to share it with us.
Thank you very much.
It's been great.
Thank you.
As promised, you can find links to all of the resources our guests mentioned for you today, as well as more information on the 100 Ballads Project and how you can listen to the specific ballads and those numbered ones of 115 and the others that we mentioned today. You can find them and listen to them at the 100ballads.org website. I will have links to all of this in the show notes today at CassidyCash.com/episode 324. That's CassidyCash.com/EP324. While you're on the show notes page, if you would like a more in-depth look at the history we're talking about today, including some links to the ballads that we're talking about, images of those woodcuts that we discussed, and other artifacts and primary documents and research tidbits all about the in-depth history of ballads from Shakespeare's lifetime, then be sure to use the Become a Patron button to join or to log in if you are already a patron of our show, and all of these extras will expand right there on the CassidyCash.com website. Again, that URL is CassidyCash.com/EP324. That Shakespeare Life is made possible by listeners just like you who sign up to be our patrons. Patrons of our show get unlimited access to all of our detailed show notes, over 150 bonus episodes of our show, and special insider extras, including a video library, animated versions of Shakespeare's plays, and a collection of educator resources like hands-on history activity kits that help you take our podcast right into your classroom. Find out more, explore all the extras, and sign up today at patreon.com/thatshakespearelife. That's patreon.com/thatshakespearelife. That Shakespeare Life is researched and produced by me, Cassidy Cash. Our audio engineer is Gary Mayholm. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.